You're listening to the Meat Magazine Interviews radio show. Today is August 16th of 2017. I have a very different show today. Usually I do interviews on my show, but actually today I have a special guest, and we're going to do a review of the hit movie Get Out. Let me check the line here and see if she's there. Hello, Jayde.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. And you yourself?
Oh, I'm doing good. Now, normally I do an introduction at the beginning of the show, so I know we don't have very much time, but I'm going to just say a little bit about the film, and then we're going to get right into the review, okay? You ready?
Yep, I'm ready. Thank you.
Okay, so Get Out was theatrically released on February 24th of 2017. The film had a budget of just $4.5 million and went on to gross over $252 million worldwide. Now, that's a 630% return of investment. Now, Get Out, as of August, is the most profitable film of 2017. And the highly rated film was directed, written, and produced by Jordan Peele. So I welcome my guest, Jayde Eubanks, to the Meat Magazine show so we can discuss this film. Now, we actually talked about it previously on YouTube, and we both agreed that the film should be nominated for awards because the film is so good. And I guess we should start from the beginning. Now, the movie started out with a man walking and talking on the phone in the suburbs at nighttime, and a car pulled up out of nowhere and abducted him. And he was put into the trunk of a car, and the car just drives off. And now with that opening scene, unfortunately, before I watched the film, I actually went online and watched other people's reviews of the movie, so I kind of knew what the movie was about before watching it. Did you check out other people's reviews? Yeah. Did you? Yes, I was going to ask you if you checked any spoilers online or anything like that before you watched the film, or did you go into it not knowing what you were going to see?
Well, I actually went and saw it the day it came out because I didn't want people giving me spoilers. That's how I am with pretty much every film that I see. I will go and see it the day of just so people don't tell me about it, because especially where I'm from, everybody talks about movies all the time, and I just knew people were going to spoil that for me. And the fact that it was Jordan Peele's first, kind of directorial debut by himself and without Jordan, or I always forget his name, Keegan, is it Keegan Key? I always forget. But he, with it being his first debut, I wanted to go into it with my own opinion of what I was going to see. And I was extremely happy with what I saw.
Yes, it's funny because a lot of people don't like movie spoilers. Like me, I don't really mind so much. And with this film, I definitely did not mind because actually it was the spoilers that made me want to see the film so bad. I said, really? That's what this movie is about? Because the commercials are really confusing. I saw the lady Georgina in the movie, right, and she was just shaking her head saying no, and I saw some guy running towards the star of the movie, Chris, and then running the other way. But it didn't really tell you very much in the trailers and the commercials for the film.
Yeah, well, I think that actually benefited it. I feel like when you have a trailer about weird shit going on, sorry, excuse my language, when you have a trailer about weird stuff happening, it kind of makes you want to see the film because you want to realize how different this film is going to be. Because I know when I saw the trailer and I saw, Georgina, and she was like, no. I was like, okay, that's really odd, but that has to be super important to the plot. And then the guy, when they called it the Get Out challenge, where everybody was doing it on the internet, they were, running towards a random person and just dodging off. I feel like that was a moment in the trailer where I was like, okay, now I really need to see this movie to figure out what's going on. It was very weird for me.
Yes, absolutely. Thankfully, I guess the spoilers that I watched weren't as detailed as what I thought they would be, because there were times where I was watching the film where I was kind of trying to figure out what in the world was going on. Like, even the opening scene, you know, it took me, for whatever reason, the longest time to realize that the guy that Chris met at the party with the straw hat on was the same guy from the opening scene. Like, I didn't connect the two for whatever reason. And but yeah, like, the movie, it was just so well made. It wasn't one of those movies where it's all over the place. It was very, very detailed, and there were lots of things in the scenes that were kind of like subliminal messages, maybe some Easter eggs and whatnot. And a lot of people who saw the film felt that the film was actually trying to speak about organ harvesting. And when I watched the film, I didn't get that from it. What do you think about the theory that the film was actually trying to expose organ harvesting?
Well, I actually did read that. Probably, I would say about a month after the movie came out, I read that, and I thought it was really interesting. I think that could be a possible theory, but I feel like the movie overall is just about kind of like stealing black culture. And what I mean by that is, you know, there's a part in the movie where Chris goes to this party, and he's, you know, he has to talk to all the guys, you know, all the guests at the party to get him, to kind of get them to know him. And there was an older guy at the party who says black is in fashion, which, you know, kind of pissed me off. But I think that people think that people don't actually say stuff like that or think that. I feel like now more than ever, white people are stealing black culture. But apparently that's not enough. We have white women getting plastic surgery to obtain features that black women naturally have. Black women are some of the most disrespected people in America. I mean, they're made fun of for their braids, their plump lips, and their fashion. But now every white girl wants that. And I feel like just the movie overall is about stealing black culture. I don't know about organ harvesting. That could possibly be part of it. But like I said before, I feel that that's very strong in my belief that that's what the movie's about.
Right. It was like cultural appropriation on steroids, like cultural domination, like it was beyond appropriation. Absolutely. But I noticed that as well, and I agree with that. But there were actually two things that really stood out to me that a lot of people in the reviews, I just really didn't hear people talking about. Like, one of the things that I noticed was that these people, technically, if they just keep jumping from body to body, they can kind of live forever. So I got kind of a quest for immortality vibe from the film, you know, and that's one of the things that I really thought about. I said, wow, it's as if they're trying to live forever. And another thing that I got from the film was the fact that, well, according to what different people were saying to Chris in the movie, you know, you guys have. Now, I wrote down exactly what was said because I have the notes here. I'm trying to find it here as I'm speaking. But in so many words, what he was saying, one of the men in the film, was, you know, Chris, actually, it was Rose's brother. Rose's brother said, you know, if you trained in martial arts, you could be amazing at it because you already have what you need physically. But he said, but you know, at the end of the day, it's really a mental sport, like playing chess. And what I thought about when he said that was actually the KKK Grand Wizard David Duke. I saw a YouTube video from him where he explained, you know, black people are really great at running fast. And, you know, they may be physically strong, but white people are mentally strong. And the movie made me think about that David Duke video, like, wow, like there are really people who believe that black people can only do things physically, whereas white people, you know, like I may not be able to beat you in basketball, but I can outthink you. I can come up with the better plays. And I wanted to know what you thought about that, about the differences between people's abilities mentally and physically.
Well, that quote that you just said, I actually wrote that down too because I rewatched the film yesterday because I really wanted to analyze it, and I really wanted to delve deeper into the meaning of the film. And at that part, I kind of, you know, scoffed because he foreshadows kind of the ending of the film. Because I think, you know, anyone who's seen the film, we see, you know, the brain transplanted into, you know, a black person's body. And I feel like it's so frustrating because it's foreshadowed throughout the entire film. You just don't put the two together. And personally, I think, with all the racism that's going on in this country, and for white people to think that they are smarter than black people, and for anyone to think they are smarter than anyone simply based off of race is just absolutely ridiculous. I think it just has to do with your upbringing, how hard you study, where you come from, and I just think it's an absolutely ridiculous concept that you are smarter simply because you're of a different race. I mean,
yes,
my thing is look at Chris in this film, right? Chris is this absolutely wonderful photographer. I mean, does being a photographer require like genius level intellect? Probably not. He has a good eye, which is why the blind guy wanted him so bad was because he said, "I want your eye." It has nothing to do with your brain. It has everything to do with your talent and your ability in yourself.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, I definitely wrote that down too. I wrote down some notes about the scene where he met up with the blind man, who was, if I'm not mistaken, an art dealer. Let me see. I'm trying to find that notation here. Right, his name was Jim Hudson. He said he was a blind art dealer, and his assistant basically explained to him what the different photographers were doing as far as what type of pictures that they took and how detailed they were and whatnot, so then that way he could decide which pieces of art to purchase. And, he said to Chris later on in the movie, which, I know we're kind of jumping around here, we're not really going in chronological order, but he said to him, with him personally, it wasn't about race. He's like, I want your eyes, man. I want those things that you see through. And I don't know about you, but it sent chills up my spine when he said that. Like, it was, because like the movie is definitely mainly about race, but the fact that he was like, you know what? Okay, for other people, that may be what it's about, but Chris, for me personally, I just want your eyes. And, to me that was just so deep, because while most of those people were strictly judging things based off of race, since he was blind anyway, even though he could see previously, he wasn't really looking at race. It was just him trying to see, period.
Right.
So it really, I think that was just so interesting that Jordan wrote that into the film. I mean, there was just a lot of interesting dialogue in general, and and there were so many things that I don't think that a lot of people noticed when they were watching, like visually. For example, when Rose was looking for the keys so that Chris could get out, if you looked at her sweater, she was wearing like I guess a red and white or red and gray sweater, and it made me think about like, where's Waldo? Like, for example, stuff like that. Like, with Jordan being a comedian, I think that he thinks like that. He would write something like that into the script. Like, I'm going to have her wearing a Where's Waldo sweater while she's looking for the keys. Just like little funny things like that. Or when she was sitting there eating the Fruit Loops, she had her glass of milk separate. She had the white separated. Oh, you noticed that, right?
Yeah, that scene just is so creepy to me. It literally, that sends chills up my spine, because I just sit there and think, if somebody really eats their cereal like that for the dumbest reason, I would probably think they are psychopaths. I don't see how Chris didn't see it from the beginning. She's a really good actress, let's just say that.
Yes, and one of the things that people probably didn't notice, there were two things that I noticed about that. First of all, she was drinking the milk through a black straw. I don't think there was any coincidence that Jordan chose a black straw for that scene. I think that was like a subliminal joke, like a phallic symbol joke. And then the other thing I noticed is when she switched up the way that she was acting, and she started acting as her true self when her real self came out, she took her hair from being down and put it into a ponytail. Like, when she switched personality, she immediately changed her hair. And kept it that way until the end of the film. And I think that's something that kind of slipped through people's minds. And it may be something small, but I happen to be a writer as well. And like those little details just made the scene so much more interesting. The fact that Jordan wrote that into the scene, like that she would change her hairdo when her personality shifted. I just think that that's really interesting to write that into the character. But another thing that I noticed, which I don't think a lot of people noticed, is that when they zoomed in on Chris's boots, his boots were not just tied up to the top with the shoestrings and then, you know, like tied in a bow in the front. They were like wrapped around his ankles like shackles. Did you notice that in the film?
I actually didn't notice that. I would have to go back and check that out. But I'm glad you said something, because now I got to figure out what that is.
Ever since the beginning of the film, when he went to go check the deer that they hit in the car on the road, the way that they basically zoomed into his boots when during that scene when he was going to look into the forest. And if you look closely, yes, his boots are and I said to myself, now that's just odd. Why are his shoestrings wrapped around his ankles? And then I realized something, that they're tied like shackles. And that was definitely something that stuck out in my mind, because I actually watched it for my second time today, right before this show. And that was one of the things that I wrote down to mention, because I said, wow, I never heard anybody mention that in their reviews of the movie. And right now, another thing that really stuck out to me, like I was saying before, about, you know, what David Duke was saying about some people have some people have mental gifts and some people have physical gifts, but, you know, like that, they're basically attributed to different races, like as if God designed people that way, like you can be the brains and you can be the body, which I think sounds ridiculous. And it was so funny to me, because during the scene with the father and Chris, he basically said to him, you know, my father was in this race in like 1936 in Berlin, the Berlin Olympics.
Yes.
And he said, you know, this black man came in, Jesse Owens, while Hitler was talking all this superior Aryan race stuff, but a black man was able to win the race. And it brought me back to what I heard David Duke say about, like, some people are have more talent physically and some people are better mentally. And it really stood out as I was watching that scene. And, you know, another scene that happened to stick out to me, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of like a little bit, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to say next, because like I usually don't do movie reviews. This is actually my first movie review, so I'm trying to figure out what I want to talk about, because I took like a lot of notes. I actually wrote down so many different things. Another thing that stuck out to me was when Chris was tied up to the chair, they showed a deer's head on the wall. At the beginning of the movie, they also showed a deer's head. I think it was sitting on like a table or something. So there were multiple deer heads in the home. And I never heard anybody mention this in the reviews, but I said to myself, could one of those deer heads, possibly the one in the room where he's tied up in the basement, be the head of the deer from the beginning of the movie that hit the car? And that's what I was actually wondering, since I think I first saw the movie in February. I said, could that deer's head on the wall have been the deer from earlier, therefore maybe the dad set them up with the whole deer situation? Like, do you think that's a possibility?
Well, I definitely did notice the deer in the room, and it might be a little far-fetched that the dad set that up, because I mean, like, deer are wild, and that would probably be something hard to control. But I almost felt like the deer's head in the room like had a camera in it, because they kept zooming up on the eyes and stuff. And my thing is like, you would think these people would be smart enough to put a camera in the room to make sure somebody don't escape or something. So right. I thought that maybe having a camera in the head might possibly be a possibility. I don't know. That would be really hard to say. But I definitely did notice that there was a running theme of deer in this movie.
Yeah, and from what I got from it, I said to myself, now, are they trying to say that Chris is being hunted like a deer, and the family are basically a family of hunters, and that's why when Rose came after him at the end of the movie, she happened to have like an old school kind of old model rifle, like a hunter would use back in the day, like that was her grandfather's rifle, for example. Mm-hmm. And another one of the things that really stuck out to me, which I know a lot of people mentioned the cotton part, you know, that he picked the cotton out the chair and put in his ears, and that's like a reference to slavery and picking cotton. Yeah, but one of the things that I noticed was that when the mother was stirring the teacup, I said to myself, it's like she's using magic. Like, that's the way that I thought about it. And it's so interesting that when Rod from the TSA, Chris's friend, was trying to figure out what was going on, he's like basically brainstorming, trying to piece everything together. He said, rather, one of the ideas that he came up with is, maybe it's magic that they're using. And then he's like, no, magic isn't real. And he kept bringing everything back to these people being abducted to be a part of some sort of sex cult, sex slaves, things like that. And, you know, he didn't really see the grand scheme of things, that it's like so much more than that, it's so much further beyond that, you know, that they were basically trying to control the person's body and take over their existence, period.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that another thing that wasn't really mentioned in people's reviews is that when Chris got into, I can't remember the brother's name, Rose's brother. Do you remember what?
I believe it was
Jeremy. When he got into Jeremy's car at the end of the movie where he's trying to get away, there was a helmet in the passenger seat. And I never heard anybody mention that, but it made me think, like, this guy was basically, I don't know, maybe he was kind of a bit of a coward, but he wanted to be like this brave warrior. So that's why he was so obsessed with violence, and that's why he had the helmet in his car, and he was always carrying a pole or a stick or something like that around all the time, like having these violent thoughts, like very much so disconnected. And I wanted to know what you thought about the character Jeremy in the movie, as far as the odd way that he was acting, and the fact that Chris assumed that he was drunk all the time when it was something beyond that. Like, I wanted to know your thoughts on Jeremy.
Well, I think Jeremy was a pretty complex character. I feel like most of the movie, the first time watching the movie, you kind of assume he's just kind of like the fun, drunk brother that just kind of, you know, insults people not even realizing it. But then when I went back and watched the film, it looked like he was pretty jealous. Like, I don't think he thinks, like, you know, at the dinner table, he's sitting there talking about how, you know, there's the mental thing, and then there's a physicality with black people. And then when you put the two together, you know, that makes a better person, apparently. But I felt like he honestly was just very jealous of Chris. And, you know, at the table when he's talking about, you know, UFC and fighting and that kind of thing, when he tells Chris to stand up at the table, I feel like he himself was probably trying to decide whether or not he wanted to take over Chris's body. Because, you know, at the gathering of the party that Chris went to, it looked like everybody was trying to test him to see if he's the person that they want to be. And I feel like Jeremy, he was very jealous to me. And I think he wanted to be Chris. And when he realized that he had nothing to offer for him, he kind of just, like, gave up hope.
Yes, I totally agree. He definitely wishes that he had Chris's physical capabilities so he could be this judo master or whatever it was he was trying to do. But one of the things that I noticed was during the bingo scene, I don't think that I saw a bingo card in Jeremy's hand. I'm not sure.
No, he wasn't. He actually wasn't even sitting down with the party. I realized watching the movie, he was, I think he was off at a table in the background, and he just sat there and watched. He didn't have a bingo card in his hand, so I feel like he had already made up his mind that that is not the person that he wants to be.
Right.
He was like, he ain't the one. I don't want to be him.
Right. I wonder if the reason why they did that was because, the reason why he sat on the sidelines is because the family was trying to sell Chris for money, and maybe Jeremy couldn't afford to pay for him because, he was so busy drinking and trying to be a jiu-jitsu master, he couldn't afford Chris's body. But one of the things that I noticed, and I actually noticed this at the end of the movie, when the grandfather character, the guy who was the groundskeeper, when he took his hat off at the end of the movie, I noticed the scar in his head, and I had this realization. Everyone who had the brain transplant surgery was either wearing a hat or a wig. Whether it was the man at the party with the straw hat, the groundskeeper wearing his hat, and Georgina wearing the wig, they all had on some sort of head garment to cover up the scar. And I just thought that was really interesting. That was definitely something that stood out to me watching it the second time. Did you notice that by any chance?
Definitely. I feel like when Georgina, I was wondering, there's that scene where she's, standing in the window at night and Chris is outside and he's watching her look at herself in the mirror. I realized that she was messing with her, with the bangs on her wig. And I was like, that doesn't really mean anything. But then there was later on when Chris was, spying on her, which you probably shouldn't do, but he was spying on her through her window. And she actually lifted up her wig as if she was looking at something. And I realized in that moment, I was like, she looks very suspicious, like she's looking at something. And then she quickly put her wig down, like, I don't want him to see this. So I definitely noticed that everybody who had scars was wearing something over the head. And I just have to, give a huge props to Jordan Peele. I feel like nothing gets by that man. He thinks of absolutely everything in this movie.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, another thing that just came to my mind, I didn't write this down. I meant to write it down. In the scene where Rose was eating the Fruit Loops and drinking the milk out of the black straw, in the background, behind her on the wall, were all of the pictures of the people that she helped to abduct. Just like how the father had his deer headpieces of the things that he hunted, and then she had her pictures of her victims that she hunted, and it was like they were like trophies from their different victories. So it was like they were all hunters, and that definitely stuck out to me. And another thing, one of the things that really, it bothered me, but actually I was happy that it was in the movie. When they were at the party, there was one Asian man, just one. Everyone else was white. There were only two, there were the black people who worked at the house, the servants to help. And then there was Chris, and there was a guy who was abducted. Logan, a.k.a., I forget what his real name was, but he went by the name Logan after he changed his name. Pardon?
I think it may have been Dre.
Dre, that's his name. Dre Hayward, I think, or Hayworth, something like that. When they were at the party, there was only one Asian man. And the Asian man said to Chris something to the effect of, has the African American had more disadvantages or advantages in the modern world? Now, when I saw that, I laughed, even though it wasn't really funny. It was more of like a nervous laugh, and I said, now, here's an Asian man saying something like this, and it's like I understand why he was saying it, but what way did you interpret that question that he asked Chris at the party?
Well, first, I think I'd like to say that I think this Asian man had an identity crisis, because I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like a lot of Asians, don't get the same opportunities as white people either. So the fact that this Asian man thought that black people had more advantages made me laugh, because I feel like a lot of people know that, with all the racism and the discrimination and stereotyping that happens right now, black people really don't have advantages in the modern world. And the fact that Asian guy said this, when Asian people don't exactly have advantages either, was a very interesting, and I noticed that it was the Asian guy that said that. It wasn't a white person that said that. So I wonder what was going through Jordan Peele's mind when he wrote that down, when he wrote that specific scene, why he had an Asian guy do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And, for sure, I've seen the different income charts, and it's actually Asian men who make more money than white men. They're the only people who make more money than white men according to the statistics and whatnot. And for him to ask Chris that question, I said to myself, now that is mind-blowing, but I thought that it was such an incredible thing to write into the script, because I'm like, I could totally see somebody asking such a dumb question. Like, and I can just imagine me standing there, like, looking at Chris, like, are you stupid? And then asking somebody else, hey, what do you think? Like not wanting to answer it. Because it's like, how in the world do you even answer a question like that somebody asks you? And another thing that stuck out to me in the movie was when Chris and the dad walked outside, and the groundskeeper's there. This is at the beginning of the movie. The dad says to Chris, I know it's totally cliche being a white family with black servants, and how he hired them, Georgina and the groundskeeper, to take care of his parents. However, when they died, he couldn't bear to let them go. And I said to myself, now, you couldn't bear to let your parents go, or you couldn't bear to let the people who their brains are in the bodies of go. And another thing that he said was, I hate the way it looks. So on the surface, it's like he's saying, I hate the way it looks, with me being this white man with these black servants. But in reality, what he's saying is, I hate the way it looks. I hate the way that black people look. And I think that kind of went over a lot of people's heads when he said that, because of the way that it was written into the script, because the father was so liberal, progressive, or whatever way somebody may want to describe him. Like, I would have voted for Obama 3 times if I could, little things like that he would say. Mm-hmm. But in reality, he was more racist than a lot of the people that people know are racist. You know what I mean? Like, he was basically like a racist with a mask on, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I feel like this dad was a pretty, what's the word? I can't think of the word. He was very, relatable. There's people, there are white people who say, oh, I'm not racist, I have black friends. It's kind of like the same thing. The dad was kind of like, I'm not racist, but I have all these black servants. I know how it looks. I just felt like it was kind of along the same line.
Yes. Yeah, I've met people like that dad who... Okay, I'm trying to be careful how I'm wording this, because I don't want to offend too many people, but people who are able to make you think that they're one person when they're really a completely different person. They're just putting up the greatest con job ever, just a great actor. And like you were saying, the dad was relatable, and it's because he basically, I guess, studied people, and he knew what to say to who. In order to get into their mind. And speaking of getting into the mind, the mother had a place where she would send people where they were hypnotized called the sunken place. Now, my personal opinion was that, rather my interpretation of the sunken place is like the subconscious mind. And it's like where people's deepest fears, regrets, and darkest secrets are hidden, like a subcompartment of the mind. What do you think about the sunken place? Like, what is your interpretation of it?
Well, I definitely agree with what you said. You said it's kind of, like suppressing into your subconscious. But I feel like the sunken place kind of, represented the box that white people put black people in. It's, white people like black culture but don't want to accept the people who created this culture. Therefore, they'd rather put them in little boxes, refusing to give credit to the original inventor. So in this movie, if you look from Chris's perspective, when he's looking out through the sunken place, what he sees out of is literally a square, like a box. And it's kind of, what I said before, it's like putting black people into little boxes. She quite literally was doing that, just, with their subconscious. And then they were taking, the bodies and selling them to white people for white people to then transplant their brains into, because they would rather be stronger and faster. But, our white minds are smarter, so, let's keep our mind, whatever. And, it's kind of like what I said before about, how white girls now want the same features as black women. It's kind of like what I said before about, braids, how black girls want, or white girls want braids, and they think it's stylish and cool, but then when black women do it, it's because they need to tame their hair, because society tells them that natural hair is distracting. And even then, when black women put their hair in braids, they're still made fun of for it. There are so many, and I know I keep kind of trailing off from the original question, but I feel like these are topics that kind of come out throughout the movie that people don't even really notice.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I totally agree, and I appreciate you bringing up those things. The movie, despite the fact that it's only about an hour and 45 minutes, about an hour and 45 minutes in length, including credits, it puts so much, he puts so much information in there, and I love the fact that at the end of the movie, Rose may have actually survived, because when Chris and Rod drove off, it kind of left the question there, like, did Rose survive? Is there going to be a part 2? And I hope that those things you were mentioning about, for example, like the cultural appropriation things, the issues with the hair and things like that, the body image and people trying to look like other people, I hope that there will be a part 2, which I know some people will say, well, that would ruin the original, but I don't think so. And I wish that they would kind of tackle those issues, like kind of fit them in there. If there were to be a part 2, would you watch the film?
If it's done correctly and if it's done with thought, I would definitely watch a part 2, especially because in the movie we saw Andre Hayworth, and, he eventually became this man married to a woman 30 years his senior named Logan. If you realize, we didn't see what happened to him. So in the second movie, I would like to see what happens to him. Does he continue living this lie of being married and to this woman who's not even his wife, or is he going to be able to function as himself after this whole incident? Because, they said that they only keep the part of the brain that controls the nervous system. So my question is would he be able to come back and function in society as himself, or is he stuck as this person forever?
Exactly. He's definitely a character that I would have to look out for if Jordan does put together a sequel. He's definitely probably the main person that I would be, looking forward to, well, other than Rod, because he has some really funny lines in the movie, and I wonder what type of dialogue Jordan would come up with for him. But yeah, those two, even though Chris was technically the star of the movie along with Rose, but yeah, those two guys right there. And we don't have much time, but I just wanted to ask you about one more thing that happened in the film.
Sure.
When Chris went to bed with Rose, and he woke up. He looks over, and there's a stuffed lion on the bed. Now, of course, lions come from Africa, and they say that the lion is the king of the jungle. And the way I interpreted the stuffed lion was that, okay, this is a lion, the king of the jungle, or Chris, the black man, this strong black man. But at the end of the day, he's just a toy that's on Rose's bed.
Wow. Like, I did notice that the lion was there, and I had the same thought that, you know, lions are from Africa. And I think it's interesting that you do bring up the king of the jungle part, because it's like, you know, I feel like black culture and black people are very strong, and it's different to see in this film a black person be succumbed to not being strong, if that makes sense. Like, in this film, I feel like Chris wants to be very strong for Rose. He wants to be the strong boyfriend and that kind of thing. But, you know, he's surrounded by a whole bunch of, you know, white people that don't really understand. So he has to kind of, you know, change his personality around him. I mean, there is that one part where he said, where he's in his room, and I think Georgina walks in, and he said, "Too many white people make me nervous." And,
right,
you know,
yes.
that was the point when Georgina, you know, started acting crazy, and she was, you know, like, "Oh, no, 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 no." And I realized in that moment that when he said that, it almost looked like the real woman who owns Georgina's body came out for a second. So I feel like him saying that kind of had the same effect as when he would take a picture of someone with a flash on. It was like the real person inside Georgina came out and realized, my life has been stolen by white people. And this guy just reminded me of that. So then I think when she was saying, you know, no over and over again, it was Rose's grandmother coming out trying to cover up or trying to answer for this girl who was obviously in distress and was basically trying to get help. And, you know, she covered it up and made it look like she was just crazy and then just walked right out of the room.
Absolutely. Jayde, unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank you for being a guest on the show today. You were awesome. I love the way that you interpreted the movie. You definitely opened my mind to some things that maybe I did not notice. And I'm going to actually go back and watch the movie a third time now after I play back the show and see what I see for a third time. It's like every time you watch it, you see something new. Thank you so much for calling into the show today, Jayde.
Oh, no problem. I had fun.
All right, great. Hopefully you're calling for another movie review, maybe sometime soon.
I'd love to, especially if you go see Detroit, like we discussed, because that one I feel like is definitely a movie that we should discuss.
That'll be the next one we discuss. Awesome.
All right.
All right, thank you so much for calling again. Can you tell people that are listening where they can find you on social media?
Well, I really am kind of a private person, so I pretty much just have the YouTube channel. My YouTube channel's name was Jayde Eubanks. I actually went back and changed it today to make it a little more